Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Phil. Welcome to Phil's Computer Lab. Today we're looking at a very interesting product. It is the SCSI2SD hard drive replacement. One of my viewers actually brought this device to my attention. So I had a look on the internet, did a bit of research, and I got in touch with Interior Computing, and they were kind enough to send me a review unit. The SCSI2SD device has a lot of features and we will go over them later in the video. To briefly summarize it, it is basically a modern replacement for old SCSI drives that uses a micro SD memory card for storage. Back in the day, SCSI drives were known for offering higher performance, often having rotational speeds of 10,000 or even 15,000 RPM. Another benefit of SCSI drives is that they don't require as much processor time compared to IDE. Now this video is not a tutorial about SCSI, so I'm just gonna brush over the basics. You will use a SCSI controller. I'm gonna go with the Adaptec 1542 CF. Now SCSI controllers have an onboard BIOS. That means you are not constrained by the hard drive capacity limitations that old machines have in the BIOSes. For example, on a 386 or on a 486 machine, you usually run into a 500 megabyte capacity limit. This is not the case with SCSI. So SCSI hard drives have a lot of good things going for it. However, there are also some downsides, especially if you're using a fast 10,000 or 15,000 RPM hard drive. They will produce a lot of noise. They also generate a fair amount of heat, so you definitely have to sort out some sort of cooling. SCSI hard drives are quite old, 15 years or more, so reliability is definitely a concern. Some of these SCSI drives can also cost quite a bit, especially if you're looking for a 50-pin version and with a larger capacity of around 6 or 8 gigabytes, expect to pay quite a bit. The SCSI2SD is very popular with home computers and also samplers. However, in this video we will focus on using them in a classic PC. Basically a 386 or 486 is a really good computer to use this device in. The machine we're using today is a 386 SX running at 33 MHz. We've got 4 megabytes of video RAM, an ISA Cirrus Logic graphics card, there's a 17-inch monitor, and an ESS audio drive sound card. Let's have a closer look at the unit. We've got the 50-pin SCSI connector here, and this is the Molex connector to connect your power supply. You can also power the unit through the USB interface, or if your SCSI host controller supports it, through the SCSI ribbon cable. These resistors provide the termination for the SCSI bus. If you're using another device that terminates the bus, you just have to remove these. And this is the micro SD card slot. Now I'm using a 4 gigabyte card. However, you can use larger capacities. On the website, it states they've used 64 gigabyte SD cards and greater. Because this is a standard micro SD card, you can just use a standard USB memory card reader and access all the information on your modern computer. So this is a really neat way of transferring files back and forth between your modern desktop and your retro DOS PC. This header here can be used to attach a hard drive activity LED, for example, leading to the front of your case. And this is the USB connector. You use this to configure the device, and we will look at this in a lot more detail later. You can also flash the latest firmware if there's an update. On SCSI hard drives, you usually found a couple of jumpers, and that will let you configure the SCSI ID number, for example, or certain drive parameters like parity. There are no jumpers to configure this SCSI2SD. Everything happens through the USB interface, and that's what we're going to look at in more detail in the next section. Okay, let's have a look at the software. Now this software is available for Windows, but also for Linux and OS X. Under the General Settings tab, we can configure general properties of the SCSI2SD, for example, enabling parity or enabling unit attention. The program uses tooltips, so if you hover your mouse over one of these options, it gives you a bit more information. The SCSI2SD can emulate up to 4 devices. You can access them with these tabs. By default, only the first device is enabled. If you want to use the other 3 devices, you have to enable them first. We're gonna keep it simple and just configure a single device for a typical 386 computer. The first thing we need to do is give the device a SCSI ID. I recommend you stick with 0 in order to boot from the hard drive. You can also choose the device type. At the moment, I'm just gonna stick with configuring a hard drive, but there are options to configure a CD-ROM, for example, a floppy drive, and other devices. For the first device, put a 0 for the SD card start sector and untick auto. Here you can configure the sector size. For our scenario, 512 bytes is the standard. And this is where it gets interesting. Although I'm using a 4 GB SD card, I can limit the size to any capacity I want, and it will automatically calculate the sectors. For example, if I want to use just a 1 GB drive, it will recount the sectors. But we're gonna go with 2 GB because that's the limit for a partition in MS-DOS 6.22. You can also change the information in these fields. This will basically change how the device appears to the controller in the operating system. Now let's say you want to add another device, a second hard drive. So what you need to do is firstly enable the second device and then make sure that the SD card start sector is set to auto, because what that does is it will take the end sector from device 1 and take that into consideration when it works out the start sector of device number 2. Once you're happy with the settings, you connect the SCSI2SD to your computer through the USB interface and press the Save to Device button. So just briefly want to talk about the other device types. It does support the option to emulate a CD-ROM. However, the device does not support a file system, so it doesn't let you mount an ISO image. What you need to do is use an unformatted SD card and basically copy the raw image onto the SD card and then configure the start and end sectors. This is a feature I wasn't able to test because I was playing around with the upgrading of the firmware and the bootloader, and something must have gone wrong because my device doesn't work anymore. However, that's a good thing because that's an opportunity to see what the support is like, and I contacted the supplier and they were really helpful, and I'm basically packing up the unit and I'm sending it to the creator, the designer of this device. He's actually from Australia and he's gonna have a look and hopefully he can fix the mistake I made. Now let's talk about the performance. In terms of sequential performance, I got around 1 megabyte per second. But much more important than the sequential performance is the random performance. And this is where this device really shines because of the SD card. There is no access time. So accessing, reading and writing small files that are scattered across the virtual hard drive happens instantaneously. And this is what gives this device the responsiveness and the speed compared to a traditional hard drive. In terms of pricing, you're looking at $69.99. So guys, there you have it. What a cool device. It gets harder and harder finding reliable SCSI hard drives, and they do generate a lot of heat and they're very noisy. So this is a really cool replacement. But this is also interesting for people who are not familiar with SCSI because it circumvents that BIOS capacity limitation that a lot of old 386 and 486 machines have. So if you're building a machine using MS-DOS 6.22, this will unlock the entire 2 gigabytes that you can use for a single partition. It is also very fast because of the non-existing access time. Working with small files, reading and writing happens instantaneously. If you're new to SCSI, there might be a little bit of a learning curve, and you do have to get a SCSI controller. Setting everything up correctly is not as straightforward as working with IDE, but once you've got it all figured out, it actually works fairly straightforward. So all in all, I'm really impressed with this product and I can definitely recommend it if you're interested in a unique storage solution for your retro gaming PC. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video.